Well, today marks 5 years since 43 students from a teacher training college went missing in Mexico, in a case the president says remains an open wound for the country. The students were returning in a convoy from a nearby protest when they were confronted by local police who opened fire. 3 students were killed and 43 others were never seen again. The investigation into what happened has been widely criticised, with accusations of planted evidence and forced confessions. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by journalist Stephen Woodman in Guadalajara in Mexico. Mr. Woodman, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Mexico is infamous for kidnappings and murders related to gang warfare. But what was it about this case that cut through so many others?
It was the fact that the students were not involved in drug trafficking in any way, and also the fact that the police were involved and possibly even the army, some people believe, were involved in this case. So that means it's always been seen as a state crime.
So officials announced last week that they would reopen the investigation into disappearances, essentially starting from scratch. Why does the original investigation remain so controversial?
Because of the use of torture in the interrogations, and because the current government has accused the previous government of covering up information about what happened that night.
Now, after 5 years of since this first came up, what's the best that can be hoped for now?
Well, obviously the families are still seeking answers and they want some form of closure, some form of justice in this case.
And having followed this case for so long, what's stuck out the most for you? What's stayed with you?
It was, well, the sheer number of people and the fact that, as I mentioned, it's a state crime, really. The involvement of police in this incident was the real shocking aspect.
Mm-hmm. And you live in Guadalajara. Can you tell us about this recent wave of bodies that have been popping up in all these in so many private homes there?
Yeah, well, in the past, Guadalajara was considered a safe haven from the drug violence in other parts of the country, even in 2014. But it's become much, much worse. At the moment, there's a spate of mass graves being discovered in homes, which is obviously terrifying for locals.
Mm-hmm. And we understand that some bone fragments have been sent away for analysis, and we're expecting those results to come back in the next few days or so. Has there been any development in on that front?
What is happening is the president of Mexico's National Human Rights Commission has called for all of the bone fragments that the previous government linked to the students to be sent to forensic experts in Canada for analysis. So there's a possibility that there would, through that analysis, we'd have a better idea of what happened to the students.
Mm-hmm. Mexico's president was elected in December. A few months after that, he said that Mexico's war on drugs is over, and he wants to reorient funds that were intended to fight crime into so-called social programs. How does this approach of hugs, not bullets, how is this approach sitting with the Mexican people at the moment?
He still is very popular, but among certain sectors of the general public, people are realizing that he's making big promises, but there isn't a very clear, effective government strategy to confront the crisis. In fact, it's a strategy right now of denying what's going on.
Mm-hmm. He insists that it's working, though. From your vantage point, is that true?
Absolutely not. And
why is that? What are you saying?
He hasn't done anything to change the previous strategy. It's all been minor changes here and there, but he hasn't got a clear, effective strategy. And it's really beyond Mexico, this problem. It's a regional problem as well, because Mexican criminals are mostly armed with guns purchased legally in the United States. So, for example, you'd need a broader perspective to come up with anything like a comprehensive answer to what's going on.
Just going back to the original point there, that this investigation now is basically starting from scratch. Having followed this for so long, what would you personally like to see done, since they are sort of retracing their steps? What specifically should they be focusing on to try and make some significant progress?
Well, as I mentioned briefly, there are, according to one theory, the army was involved in events that night. So it would be very good if they could investigate the army. There's an army base nearby, and it would be good if they could start to explore that kind of line of investigation.
Stephen Woodman, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you.